Okay, thanks very much for the introduction. Thanks for having me here. I think in the same room I've been a few years before, so that's what I remembered that I have been here. Today I want to show a study on the last federal election in Germany in 2021 about how candidates used SEO in political election campaigns, or especially in this campaign. And my speech, or the topic I'm talking about, is based on a study which has been published this year. It was a study of Dirk and Sebastian and me, published in German in this year, and it was a full survey of all of the more than 6,000 candidates for the federal election, and the study examines the extent to which they used SEO on their personal websites. So it's not a social media study, which is quite often done in political communications, but it's on their own websites during the election campaign. And what I have to say, that it is the first study examining SEO usage on individual candidate levels. So in political communication, search engine optimization is not, it's not a topic on which it is. On which we have studies, especially not concerning quantitative data. So our explorative study is a kind of, maybe, I hope I don't make it too big, but maybe a kind of pioneer work in the system. I don't know if I have to say, or maybe 2 or 3 sentences about the German electoral system, because it's quite interesting for the results that we have for the German Bundestag. We have a mixed member proportional representation, so there's a majority vote for a candidate and a proportional vote where you elect for a party, and then there are party lists to get where you can get into the parliament. And it is quite interesting or quite important, because it has a special weight for the candidates. So not only for the front runners, but also for smaller candidates of cities, of villages, as they benefit directly from the first vote, as well as indirectly from the state list, from the election of their own person and their own party. So it's not just a matter of public perception of the parties and the front runners of the parties, as I said. So the own visibility in the election campaign is important, and this underlines why it is. This underlines the relevance of individual communication tools in the election campaign, such as SEO. So what did we want to find out? We had 2 questions to answer. The first question was basically how many and which candidates use SEO during the campaign, and which personal factors of the candidates and which organizational factors of their parties determine the use of SEO. So while the answer to the first research question is based on a descriptive evaluation of the data and allows a first look into the research field, the second question is answered by considering professionalization of politicians and political parties, so at different levels. And both questions, as I said, are exploratory, but allow for assessments of how the use of SEO itself can serve as a vehicle for further professionalization of communication. So let's get into some theoretical questions. I think we don't have to go too deep into the background of why search engines are important. I think this is quite clear here today. So I just want to give a short look how SEO takes place in studies in communication and media science or political science. And what I can tell you in advance, we can talk about that in very short time, because there are a few studies. There's one which tested the importance of search engines in terms of democracy, in terms of public theory, and which deals with the problem of outsourcing selection decisions to algorithms. So it's a very technical induced question, but theoretical question, nothing with empirical data. Then there are studies on the ranking of socially relevant sources in search engines, and there are also to get some knowledge out of the actors themselves, so of politicians, about the importance politicians attach to the topics of search engine optimization or increasing the reach of posts. So as you see, there is a lack of scientific analysis of SEO on the supplier side of political communication, so of politicians, due unknown methods to find out validly whether a website uses SEO or not. So as you see, there is a lack not only in the studies but also in working with other methods than you know in the political science or in communication science. So, and then the good fortune came about that that as a communication scientist, I was allowed to work with search study people then, and we analyzed SEO in the field of political communication. What we wanted to look at beside the question if SEO is used or not is what could be reasons that it is used, and using knowledge about the successes of one's own communication measures speaks for the professionalization or professionalism of political communication. So there are factors on both levels. On the one hand, on the individual side of candidates, and then of the organization related, so on the party side. And the professionalization, what a really hard word, shows itself on the individual level on maybe being elected or not elected into parliament. So this is the front line. Then the type of candidacy: are you a direct candidate? Are you a list candidate? And are you a candidate on one of these or both factors, which has a chance to get into parliament? So also the type of candidacy on which politicians enter parliament. And then on the party level, there is one point or one focus of professionalization is also the success of the party. So belonging to parliament as one question, but also belonging to the government, belonging to the parliamentary opposition. And when we have on the individual level, we have the question of making politician as a job. So, and the fact that professionalization can be read in this way can influence the successful use of political online communication. What I also, I had other studies where I wanted to, or where I examined it on social media. The base of the difference, if professionalization plays a role or not, is based on two different theses: on the normalization hypothesis and the equalization thesis. And if these factors have an influence on communicative, on the way politicians act communicatively, then the findings must consider with regard to these theses. According to the normalization thesis, is it that larger and more established political actors have higher presence on the internet and are more successful in the communication. So we have the same power that you see outside the internet and inside the internet on communication. And in contrast to that, the equalization thesis states that those actors who have fewer resources and have fewer mass media presence fall back on online communication tools, and thus the differences in terms of lower public presence disappear on the net. And that's what we wanted to find out with this approach. As I said, we had a look on all more than 6,000 candidates from every party, also from the smallest parties which do not have any chance to get into parliament. So we had a full survey. We had a verification of whether the candidates operate their own website. So, but we just for us were just only these websites important who were own websites, not party sub pages. And the way we approached it was as described in your presentation this morning, and so we checked, are there websites or not, and then we found out that about 1,400 have an own website which could have been analyzed, and then we checked its SEO usage on 49 indicators. These were the indicators that Sebastian showed also this morning. Our analysis is based on descriptive data for two reasons. The investigation of statistical relationship between the independent variables and the dependent had to be based on correlation, because due to the data structure and due to the results, there were not enough starting points found to do a multivariate evaluation of the data, because, as we saw, there are really a lot of candidates who use SEO on their websites. So 93% of all candidates, so at least everyone, used it. As I said, 23% have a website, and there is also a difference by about having an own website, because 23% of all candidates have one, but 48% of all candidates who went to the parliament, who got elected. So there is one sign for normalization at this level. When we watch at the 93%, we see that 19% highly or high likable used SEO plugin, and or they used a SEO plugin, which was for us the strongest indicator for SEO usage. And of the other, also 74% we saw as they probably optimized their website. We saw that a lot of them used content management systems such as WordPress, and which allow website operators to create pages using configured templates. So when you had when a website was established with such a tool, then we also said it's probably optimized. So that's the first insight, that most of the website use SEO tools, and when we have our view on websites getting into parliament after the election, then we saw that there are not so many differences, no strong differences between the parties. When you see the darker and then the more slightly blue lines, you see that there are always more than 90%, 93% of the candidates of the party who used SEO. It must be said at this point that we cannot find out which candidate which candidates actively deals with the topic of SEO. That's a blind spot until now, and it will probably be the fewest who do it actively, but most act communicatively. Nevertheless, nevertheless so professionally that their personal website is equipped accordingly. So, and that is also what we found out an interesting result. So that was these data was concerning the first question, and now we go on to the second question: which personal factors determine the use of SEO on the own website? And what we can say at the individual level is that candidates of party lists, so with electing which are not directly elected, are most likely to be positively related to the use of SEO. And I think it's remarkable because normally, I would have thought that direct candidates are more dependent because they depend on their own visibility in election campaigns, and because their electoral success is measured by personal votes. But related to the finding on list candidates, I have to say that since the study is not, or the study did not distinguish between direct candidates with a high and those with a low chance of being successful in the election, a possible influence of a promising direct candidacy cannot be examined. Then another point is that there is a connection between SEO usage and candidates who have moved to the parliament. However, the type of candidacy hardly, so the type of candidacy for the entry hardly plays a role. So the second result shows that professionalization-based SEO usage depends on election success and not on the kind of candidacy. But both results show tendencies of a normalization. So why do they show that? Because the entry to the parliament is positively linked to the probability of applying SEO. That's what we see. And it shows a tendency for more professionalized candidates to use SEO more often than less professionalized ones. And the former are those who manage to exercise political activity full-time through a mandate in the parliament. Now we come to the organization-related level, so to the party level. And what we found out is that only the entry of the party into the parliament has a possible connection with the use of SEO. It can be seen that it doesn't matter if a party belongs to the government, or as a governmental party, or as an opposition party. If a party is able to run or to get elected, then this is the line or the border of this of professionalization which we see. And insofar as it can be, or the professionalization can be identified at the higher level of the parties, as I said, boundary runs between candidates from those parties that get into the parliament and small parties that get not. So also here we see tendencies of normalization. So what do we see in general regarding to our two core questions? We see at first almost everyone uses SEO, but there are differences between the parties, between professionalized parliamentary parties and small non-parliamentary parties. So the more professionalized a candidate is, the more he or she potentially exploits own knowledge about the functionality of search engines and technical possibilities of influencing through SEO. So the search engine is an intermediary, thus becomes a catalyst for the potential visibility of candidates on the web. The second question, or the conclusion for the second question, is that professionalization of the individual level and the organization-related level correlates with SEO use, and both are, as I said, indications that normalization hypothesis is true on this case. But there are also conclusions which are beyond our core questions. What I show you. At first, professional, and I hope I don't have to say the word so often in English again, professionalization at the individual and organizational level is a factor in the design and possibly the success of online communication in election campaigns. Regarding to technical requirements, the politicians do this either consciously because they deal with it technically, or they do it unconsciously because the elements run in the background with a content management system. Both can be true, but the bottom line is the same. They use it to be more findable, to be more visible, and they trust the search engine providers that their own insecurity in evaluating the effect of SEO will be absorbed by Google, especially by Google. And another conclusion is that candidates submit to the technical requirements of major players in online communication. This is not really surprising, but it's rather rational. But it's remarkable how unanimous the result is on that. So that's really interesting. So candidates trust that following the logic of search engines will pay off in the long run. And I think when we go beyond our question, there's not only the question of politicians who use it, but there's also a question of how next questions must be answered. Do they know? Do the politicians know what they do there? Do they know how they can get more visibility through SEO? And then there is the other perspective of the voters, because Christian also said or had this statement about the digital inequalities. So it could the problem that the users do not know or do not understand the logic. Lots of users do not understand the logic of SEO or of tools like Google can come or can lead into a digital divide, because then you have the informed ones on the other hand, and you have more uninformed ones on the other. So I think this is a question which has to take, especially taking in account that the fact that SEO is used by a large number of candidates, it is normatively necessary to take also into account the ignorance, to say so, of the public, and could be points to go on with other questions in SEO usage in political campaigning. So, thanks very much for listening to me.